Well, hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the Nickel Church podcast, where we've been playing the sermons of the Rev Cliff Lamb in his last years of active ministry before he retired. These last 11 sermons were all recorded at Pearland United Methodist Church in Pearland, Texas, and represent the last couple of months of before he retired and went to live out in the country where he loved. Now, he continued preaching occasionally, doing revivals and Easter Sunday sermons and things, but this was right before he retired from full ministerial duties. So these were very important to him and to the people who were listening to them. Now, today's sermon is called Why Bother? And it's based on the scriptures from Jeremiah, chapter 20, verse 9, and Ephesians, chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Now, this will be the last of the podcasts that I do for a while. I may bring them back again, and if I do, it'll be from much earlier in his church career. But for now, let's listen to the Reverend Lamb in his last sermon before he retired from June 5th, 1994.
A few months ago, a few weeks ago, or days, I don't know. Anyhow, recently I said to y'all, if anybody happens to remember a sermon I've done that you'd like to hear again, let me know and we'll do a rerun. Well, that's kind of a risky thing to do. You know, what if nobody remembered one? But you did, and this one is one that got request, and I wanted to do it anyway. But it's the first sermon that I preached when I came to be a pastor 7 years ago. Now, it's not the same. I preached at 8:30 this morning, and it's not the same sermon as it was 7 years ago, because you have changed me, and I've grown, and we've grown together during these 7 years, and I'm not near as scared as I was 7 years ago. And it will be different even now from the 8:30 service. The text for this sermon is out of the 20th chapter of the book of Jeremiah, the 9th verse. And if I say, I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in. I cannot. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. A few years ago, I was coming back from New York on an airplane from a meeting with the Board of Global Ministries, the General Board of Global Ministries in New York. I always like to sit on the aisle seat, because when the thing crashes, I figure I can get out faster by being near the aisle. And the man in the window seat was obviously a pompous-looking businessman, and after we'd been airborne for a few minutes, he offered me his newspaper to read, and it was that New York Times that's about the eighth thick and all, you know. And so we fell into conversation, and as is normal, when two men meet for the first time and begin talking, they won't talk long before one of them is going to say to the other one, well, what do you do? So I did, and found out that he was a New York businessman coming into Houston, going to take care of some business and fly right back. And he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a Methodist preacher. He looked at me sort of fish-eyed sideways and said, his eyes said just as clearly as with words, hey, and you look reasonably intelligent too. And that was about the end of the conversation on that trip. Through the years, I've had folks to ask me about why I'm in the ministry or why I did. I know after they heard me preach, they'd say, why are you in the ministry? Maybe that's not the way, but something like that. They'd say, was your daddy a minister? And I would say, no. And they'd say, well, you know, did you think this up on your own, or did you just get some bad advice from somebody? I've had some questions about ministry. I want to talk just a very few minutes, about why preachers preach. Why bother? I remember very graphically 7 years ago, when I stood in this pulpit for the first time, I wasn't scared at all. Terrified is more the word for it, I think. And it's gotten a little better through the years. But why do preachers do this take those late night calls? Why do we do all the things that we do? Why do we make the hours that we do? Why do we face strange congregations and know that you're going to be terrified when you do? Why do my children can tell you some stories about being PKs, preacher kids, jerking their family up, getting the kids out of school, moving them away from their friends, putting them in a new school where they don't know anybody, and all of that. Why do preachers do it? But even to take it a step further, why do we do church together? You teach Sunday school classes, you come to Bible study, you sing in the choirs, you do the committee work, you do the lay leading, you do so many things. Some of it is just manual grunt labor of things that you do around the church. You give your money, you give your time, you give your energy, you give your resources, your ability. Why do preachers preach? Why do teachers teach? Why do we do church? Anyhow. Well, for preaching, I want to tell you that it's like Jeremiah said, unless there is a fire closed up inside your bones and your heart just cries out for a message to be heard, don't do it. Through the years, a number of young people have talked to me about going into the ministry. And I always tell them, listen, if you can do anything else, you do it. Because without that inner compulsion, without that consuming spirit within that won't let you do anything else, you won't like it and you won't last. And when I tell those kids that, I'm remembering about 43 years ago in that place up the country, when I felt within me, without any doubt or any equivocation at all, that the Lord wanted me to preach. I knew it. I heard no voices. I saw no bright lights in the sky. But there was inside me that burning fire that I knew I couldn't quench, though I tried. And during that unequal struggle of wills, I wore a trail around that old hackberry tree out in the front yard. When I finally could fight no longer, I sat down in the dirt and leaned back against that tree, and I said, well, okay, Lord, here I am. And I discovered to my wonder and joy that He had named my name and was beginning for me a journey that was to bring me to this point today. But without that inner fire inside, I can tell you it won't work. Because you won't tolerate it. You won't do it well. There will be a falseness about what you do, and you can't con people very long. Without that fire that's shut up in your bones. Well, why does the Lord do this anyhow? Why does the Lord lay His hands upon you and upon me and Robert and Pam and Wineva and all the rest of us and Bill, all of us, and call us to roles of leadership, call us to places to preach, call us to be in ministry through His church? What's God doing in this churchy business anyhow? Why do preachers preach? I want to talk about very briefly 2 or 3 things that I think is going on in this whole process. And one of those things is, that one of those reasons is, and if there wasn't any other reason, this one would be enough. And that is that God's not through with His world yet. God's not finished with creation yet. We read in the book of Genesis that on the first day God created us, and so on the second day and the third day and the sixth day and all of that. And on the seventh day He rested from creation. Well, I'm sure that's so. But I can tell you that on the 8th day, the Lord got up and got busy again. And He began shaping and molding the lives of people like you and me, and using us to accomplish His purpose. Because you see, God had a dream for His creation. There is a purpose being worked out here in all of this history. And that dream, that vision, that purpose has not yet become to full fruition in the world of humankind. We have not yet arrived. We are not yet there. God is not finished yet. And there needs to be some place in life, there needs to be some voice in the world that lifts up that vision of the way life can be. We're kind of sick of the way life is for a lot of our world. We want that change. We want that kingdom to become real. We want God's vision to become reality in our world. My dear friend, I don't know of any other way that it's going to happen except that people like you and me, through the church of our Lord Jesus Christ, be a part of what God is doing to help make it happen. Life is not finished yet. You and I are not finished yet. And in our lives and in our world, God is busily working out His purpose. God is working out His plan to bring it to fruition, to bring it to fullness, and to bring it to wholeness. Now, I told a story a long time ago, and I don't know whether it was in this sermon the first time or not, I doubt it, but it could have been. Anyhow, there was this lovely little lady in the nursing home, and she looked out the window one morning of that nursing home, and she saw this dapper 79-year-old man pressing up the sidewalk, and behind him came his son and daughter bringing his suitcases, and she said to herself, that guy is moving in. And she happened to know that the only vacant room in the house was next door to her. Ran back to her room, did that stuff you girls do that make you so pretty and irresistible, and fixed her hair, and leaned up against the door jamb. And when they came down the hall, she said to him, well, welcome. We're glad you're at the home. They said, you know, you look just exactly like my first husband. And this dapper man said, well, how many husbands have you had? And she said, none. Things are just not through yet, you see. Life still goes on. Life still changes. And a part of that change is the dream of God becoming reality in the world. We want to be a part of that, of proclaiming the vision, never letting the world forget this dream of God, of the possibility of what we humankind in our world can be like. That's the kingdom. And if there was no other reason for preaching, that one would be good enough. Secondly, we preach, we do church. God created the church and called you by name and me by name and set us in the midst of church, because somehow it seems that, well, there's a lot of folks outside of you and me who are not yet perfect. Not any of them present, but somewhere out there are some imperfect folk. People who are flawed. People who live sometimes with disobedience before God. People who forget who they are. People who forget the dream and forget the vision of God. Flaws. You may even have bumped into one of those folk at home where you live. You may even bumped into one of those people here in the church who are not quite yet perfect. You see, we're all a part of the rebellion. We're all a part of the problem in this world. We're all a part of, we have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's where it comes down to. We are sinful people. Imperfect, flawed, broken, fragmented. This past week, we were up at annual conference. I was sitting there, we were getting ready for the retirement service. You know, those folks took me serious about this retirement business. I was planning on standing up at the last minute and saying, April Fool! But they had me out the door before I knew what was going on good. Anyway, sitting there getting ready for that service, I was reflecting back over this 42-year journey, and I was thinking of some things that I wish I'd done differently. I was thinking of some words that I'd like to recall. I was thinking of some things that I left undone that I wish I hadn't. I was thinking about my imperfection. What can you do about the past? How can you heal the past? What can you do about this terrible load of guilt that we carry on our shoulders, all of us? This terrible burden that we carry. What can you do about it? Well, there's only one thing. Grace. Grace. Forgiveness. Acceptance. Giving. We can't change the past, can't call back words spoken. We can't go back and correct errors made very often. Hurts are there. What we know about grace, we have learned in Jesus Christ. He is the dispenser of grace. It is He who lived it out. It is He who said to us, you are forgiven, you're okay just the way you are, and I love you and I want you for mine. You know, a world we live in don't know that. We live with our angers and our hostilities and our getting evens and our one-upmanship games. But all in the world we need to do, and the only way to heal the pain, is grace. There's not a married couple listening to me this morning, but what cannot reflect back over the years of their married life, if you've been married more than 30 days anyhow, and remember the hurts, remember the pain and the disappointment. Well, the only way in the world you can make life work with a marriage or in a church or in a world is to cover the flaws with grace. Forgiveness. We got a world full of people who don't know about grace. And not only do we proclaim that grace, but God have mercy on us if we don't exemplify that grace here in the church. It was this discovery that caused John Newton to be able to write probably the favorite hymn in the church, all church. It has about 17 verses to it, and I think we've got about a half a dozen of them in our hymnal. But it starts out like this. In evil long I took delight, unawed by shame and fear, until a new object struck my sight and stopped my wild career. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. That's the balm of Gilead. That's the soothing ointment that heals and forgives. And all we know about it is in Jesus Christ. We lift up His name, the Lordship of Christ. For it is only and no other way can we deal with that terrible load of guilt. Therefore, it is in that spirit and for that reason that Robert and I say, or I say to you in the service of Holy Communion, in that moment after the prayer of confession, you are forgiven, and you are. You are forgiven. Now, you who have received grace, give it, give it, give it, and never, ever withhold it. You'll discover the secret. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Saved a wretch. If there was no other reason for preaching, that one would be good enough. But there's yet a third. There's yet a third. That is that we need each other. We who have chosen to be a part of what God is doing in His world, to bring that dream into reality, to bring the kingdom into the lives of people, we who have answered the call of Christ as clergy and laity to lift up the name of Jesus, to pronounce and to live out and to demonstrate grace in this world, we need each other. I'm telling you now, the Christian faith is not a solo journey. The music of the Christian faith is not filled with soloists, but all of us together. We need each other. You want to watch, I have done it. I have watched a church take what I would have considered a mediocre preacher and make a great one out of him. Your nurture, your upholding, your praying for, you're loving, you're believing in, you're encouraging. You see, we need each other. I have, on the other hand, seen some preachers whose sole delight was in browbeating the congregation till they couldn't hardly wiggle and didn't have a spot on them. It wasn't sore. But I have never seen they or that church come out of it happy. are whole. We need each other to bestow grace on each other and then work together, nurture it together, forgiving each other, nurturing each other, enabling each other, guiding, forgiving, upholding, reclaiming. We need each other. Clergy and laity alike, diaconals and choirs, music ministers and pastors. We need each other. There's no soloist in the kingdom. It's sort of like where it was when I was growing up as a kid. One of the symbols of manhood, being grown up, is when a boy could take a plow and plow by himself behind a team of mules. When I was a little bitty guy, I'd take my daddy a drink of cool water out of the well, out in the field where he was plowing. In the afternoon when it was hot, and I'd say, "Daddy, let me plow." And he'd say, "Oh, son, you're too small. You're too little." So that went on for several years, and finally one day I carried my daddy his water out of the well, and I said, "Daddy, let me plow." And he looked at me for a moment and he said, "Well, all right." So I got behind that plow and I reached up and got a hold of the handles, and my daddy had the plow lined over his shoulder and standing right behind me. He said, "Are you ready, son?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." I was 10 foot tall about that time. He started that team off, and for about 3 seconds, I had it going right. And then the plow got out of control, and it skidded off over here, and I plowed up corn, and I corrected it, and skidded off the other way, and plowed up more corn. And about the time I was going to burst into tears and say, "I didn't want to be a man no how," down over my shoulder would come 2 old, brown, calloused, work-starved hands. My daddy would put his hand over mine and straighten the plow up in the middle of the furrow again and then turn it loose. And when it got out of control again, down would come those hands and help me straighten it out until I learned to plow. This was a daddy teaching his boy not only how to plow, but how to be a man. That's what we're about in the church, for each other. We're the steadying hands for each other, and every one of us need that steadying hand sometimes. We are that enabler. We are that empowerment. We work together and love and nurture each other while we learn how to do kingdom and to do church. We need each other. And I thank God that you have been there for me and for James. Well, I don't know why preachers preach. Is it an ego trip? Yeah, it's that. Boy, is it ever that. Is it a business? Yes, there's a lot of business things about the church. Is it a profession? Yes, it's that. But overriding all of that, it's a fire inside. It's a compulsion that it's like Jeremiah said, when I say I'm not going to do that, I just can't help it. It's just got to be. So I worried about that a little bit in retirement. What am I going to do with my calling? What am I going to do about that fire? I can't put it out. I tried a time or two, and you cannot extinguish it. Jane came to my rescue, and she has been on this earth. She has been my stabilizer for all these years. That lady has. And here a few weeks ago, she said, "Well, Cliff, when we'll move to a new appointment every time, we had no idea what the Lord had for us to do. We had no idea what the Lord had in store for us at that place. But He always opened the door and made it known and made it possible." And she said, "I don't think He's going to quit now." So it is. So it is. Why do preachers preach? They can't do anything else. Some of them can't do that very well. But we do the best that we can. And I'm glad that in part of my time was here with you. Well, it's been a good journey because we've got the vision, what the Lord is trying to do in His world. We're going to help it happen. We're going to lift up the name of Jesus Christ and demonstrate and pronounce forgiveness of sin. And we hug each other, and we're going to love each other all the way home. Thanks be to God. Oh, thanks be to God. Amen.
and amen. And I want to thank those few of you who've been paying attention to this podcast. As I said before, this is the last one for a while. This was right at the end of his active ministry before he retired up to Hilltop Lakes and his seclusion in the country. So I hope you've enjoyed these tracks that I've played for you. There are a couple of hundred others that I do have on tape, but I think that we're going to simply keep them for posterity and record them and have them available. But it'll be a while before we put them out on the podcast again. So thank you again for listening. This is John Lamb at the Nickel Manor in Palestine, Texas, saying so long for now and God bless.